Welcome to YES's Introduction to Race and Equity Training. My name is Jacelis and I will be guiding you through this training. Make sure you are paying attention as the information in this training will help you be a better leader and because you will take a quiz at the end to check for understanding. At YES, you will work with a diverse community of youth and volunteers. It is important to be sensitive to race and ethnicity while working at YES, so that we can make sure the YES community is welcoming to all volunteers, youth, and families, and that everyone feels like they belong. The objectives of this training are to identify and analyze structural aspects of racism and its consequences to people of color, to identify racial disparities and examine how oppression causes and creates the disparities, to explore what to do if racism occurs in your community or during YES programs. First, let's check our own privilege. Read the statements and answer true or false for each one. Think about who the most and least privileged groups are in society. Take a minute to think about what it means to have privilege. How can you be an ally to those We use the term race and ethnicity often, but what do they actually mean? Take a moment to think about how you would define both race and ethnicity. Race and ethnicity. Race, a social construct that artificially divides people based on characteristics such as physical appearance, especially skin color, ancestral heritage, culture affiliation, and history, and the social, economic, political needs of the society doing the defining of race at any given time. Ethnicity, a subset of racial categories, a social construct that divides people into even smaller groups based on characteristics such as shared sense of group membership, behavioral patterns, language, political and economic interests, and ancestral geographic base. Examples: Cape Verdean, Haitian, African American, Black, Chinese, Korean, Vietnamese, Asian, French, Polish, Irish, white. So, what exactly is racism? Racism is a system created where racial prejudice plus institution slash systematic power are used to dominate, exclude, and discriminate against groups of people based on race. In short, prejudice plus a position of power slash privilege equals racism. There are two types of racism, active and passive. Active racism is conscious. One openly and explicitly states a desire to maintain the system of racism, advocates continued subjugation of targeted racial groups, and believes they are superior to the targeted racial group. Passive racism tends to be more common and is important to identify. Passive racism is unconscious, and many well-intentioned people who believe in equality act in a racist manner without necessarily meaning to. These are called racial microaggressions, which we will talk about in a moment. Passive racism is usually subtle, and the perpetrator does not usually realize they are saying something racist, which may leave the victim confused and doubtful of the perpetrator's intentions and true beliefs. So now let's look at some examples of microaggression. Perpetrators of microaggression often do not intend for their words to be racist or hurtful, yet they still may come across this way. On the next slide, we will look at more examples of microaggression and how they may be interpreted by the listener. Read through this list of microaggressions. Are any of them surprising to you? Have you experienced, witnessed, or perpetrated any of these microaggressions? Where might microaggressions be prominent during some of the YES programs like Operation Snow Sports? One way we may see microaggressions in action on the mountain is in the shops on the mountain. You may notice a shop clerk keeping a close eye on YES kids while they are in the shop, which is an example of the criminality microaggression. Color blindness is also a common microaggression and one to avoid because it is important to acknowledge youth's race and ethnicity as it is a part of their identity. Oppression. While anyone can hold racial prejudice, racism results in oppression. Oppression happens when racism is a part of the dominant culture's national consciousness and there's an imbalance of social and economic power in society. There are four I's that make up oppression: ideological, institutional, interpersonal, and internalized. Ideological oppression is the idea that one group is somehow better than another and therefore has the right to control the other group. Institutional oppression is an ideological oppression embedded in institutions of society such as laws and the legal system, police practice, education, housing, media, job development, etc. For example, the wage gap in the US. White men equals 100%. White women equals 73.5%. Black men equals 72.1%. Black women equals 63.6%. Latino men equals 57.5%. And Latino women equals 51.7%. Also, 1 in 3 black men in America will spend time in prison during his lifetime. Internal oppression gives dominant group permission and reinforcement for individual members of the dominant group to personally mistreat individuals in the targeted/oppressed group. For example, racist jokes, stereotypes, threats, beatings, and harassment. Internalized oppression happens as a result of racism. People of the oppressed group feel bad about themselves and internalize the negative messages said to them. Here's an example of the four I's of oppression in action. In this example, the topic is the achievement gap between races that occurs in education. The ideological oppression is the idea that black children are bad, stupid, lazy, and soon to be criminals. Read from the slide for the rest. Now it's your turn to apply the 4 I's to Operation Snow Sports. The topic is learning to ski or snowboard and the racial disparity when looking at the achievement gap and learning curve of youth of color. For example, the ideological oppression may be people of color cannot do snow sports. Think about where we might see other forms of oppression on the mountain. Write down your answers as you will need them in the quiz at the end. So how can we help? You can be an ally or an empowered person of color. Be an ally, a white person who actively works to eliminate racism, motivated by self-interest in ending racism, a sense of moral obligation, and a commitment to foster social justice, rather than patronizing desire to help those poor people of color. A white ally might engage in anti-racism work with other whites or people of color. Being an empowered person of color has an understanding of racism and its impact on one's life without responding to events and circumstances as a victim. Rather, being empowered means having the capacity to engage individuals and institutions with the expectation of being treated well. Allies and empowered people of color can work together to create a real change. This is what we strive to do at Yes. Thank you for participating in Yes's Introduction to Race and Equity training. I hope you feel ready to combat racism and be an ally or an empowered person of color to the youth and volunteers.